I had gotten into this matter of a perfect world and went into great research as far as this word, an English definition, the word perfect, meaning basically without flaw. And we kind of think back with Adam being in a perfect world before his fall, and that after the fall he lived in an imperfect world, and then we lose something there. Understanding this word perfect, we're seeing Adam in a perfect world. A question came to my mind. If Adam was in a perfect world, why would he need any power? What would there be to deal with in a perfect world? It would be without flaw. So why would there be any need of power? So this word perfect changed its meaning for me, not to mean the Webster Dictionary definition or our perspective of the word perfect. The perfect world is basically based in this fact. Before his fall, Adam, any of his children, his wife, and those of that generation would have had within them the power to deal with any circumstances that would arise. And God had, I might complain to God sometimes, I said, boy, Lord, you made this experience, it's supposed to be so temporary, you made it so overwhelming real at times. Sometimes it's to the extreme, which I've mentioned already, that sometimes it does reach to the extreme, and I don't think the extreme was intended of God. That was evil's intent, to make it so overwhelming real that the cares and affairs of this life would trap us. God never intended us to be trapped. He expected us to be a temporary experience, but he had to put such experience into it, the levels between high and lows, right, good and bad, but he never left us without the power to deal with any situation that would arise. What happened was that power was usurped, and we were cut off from the supply that would be without limit to deal with any circumstances that arise. That was the curse that fell on Adam. He got cut off from God. That power and ability to deal with any circumstances confronted him, and he began to feel helpless, naked, cut off from God. And it was not necessarily an evil external to him. The evil external to him had already done its work. The evil he found was his greatest enemy, was in his own mind. That comes out when God looks for Adam after the fall. And he says, where are you? He says, I was naked and I hid myself. And here's the answer to explain what I mean by in him. And God says to him, who told you you were naked? Who told you? It wasn't anything external. It came up out of his own mind. That's our greatest enemy, the mind and heart of men, cut off from God. It tends to keep you cut off from God and cut off from the source of power that would deal with this problem of feeling naked, cut off from God. Only contact with that God can never relieve us of that so-called guilt that we feel, and it gets buried and hidden in our lives, and not knowing it's really linked with a guilt being cut off from God. This power that was lost, and this curse that came on that world. Now understand this, I never saw this before until I reread the biblical flood scene in the book of Genesis, and what happened after the flood. Noah, his 3 sons, and their wives and his wife were disembarking the ark, and God says to Noah that no longer would that curse be in effect. Now understand this. The world that Adam could have known before the fall now was known after the flood. We live in that perfect world that Adam would have had. The difference between Adam's world and our world before the flood, before the fall, now after the flood, the perfect world before the fall and the perfect world after the flood is that power is not comprehended by men. That what men have lost, God has restored. Now, like I've said, that power was always there in the mind of God, available to men, if they would avail themselves. But because it was hidden and men were unaware of it, it was a mystery to them. Only now and then would a prophet show up that would manifest this power, and they were amazed at these people. And sometimes, they kill them because they were unusual. They were strange, They didn't fit the general flow of things and the limited views and perspective of mankind. They had powers that they didn't understand. Said they saw them as something wrong with these guys. Said they would kill them. But God has always had this power, because like I said, Christ was slain before the foundation of the world. There was a problem. God answered to address the problem. There was no need for any man to ever be without power. All they need to do is bring themselves back to God through that power. Understanding, like the story of Cain and Abel, the difference between Cain's sacrifice, offering to God, and Abel's offers to God, that the source. How do I say this now? Their two lives, I guess this is the way I can say it, their two lives demonstrate what I mean by a world that had lost power and a world that had regained power. Because one was in tune with God, the other was not in tune with God. Cain offered his own self-efforts, cut off from God, to try to please God. Whereas Abel had heeded to hearing from God and doing what God told him to do, as far as his being a shepherd, and not utilizing the fruits of his own hand. See how the difference is, self-effort is a lot of work and toil and labor, whereas with Cain, whereas with Abel, it was easy. Christ said, take my yoke upon you, learn from me, my burden is light, and it's easy, and you'll find rest for your soul. Rather than sitting there trying to go the world's way, cut off from God and try to figure it all out, God's way is easier because it gives you intrinsic abilities to hear from God. I want to read to you now a piece. I don't know its source, but that's okay. But it brings out spiritual truth. Now hear this in light of the intrinsic ability that's in us. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I? To be brilliant, gregarious, talented, famous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It is not just in some of us, it is in every one of us. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our fear, our presence automatically liberates others. This is part of the speech from Nelson Mandela, inauguration speech in 1994. Now this isn't originated with him, but he used this speech, for whatever intent purpose he used it for. We're using it for a different intent purpose here, to reveal the intrinsic sons of God and the potential that every man has been lit by Christ that comes into the world. Paul discovers it. He calls it the mystery. Christ in us. Christ before the foundations of the world. This Christ which wasn't Jesus' last name. It means the anointing. The anointing of God and His grace accomplished to His Son has lightened every man that's come into this world. Not just those after His biblical death, burial, and resurrection, but has been there since the foundation of the world. Else the prophets of old, very few saw it then. Paul manifested it, and they didn't understand it. Yet Paul revealed what the prophets were doing. They were manifesting the intrinsic ability of God, where He's lit every man to come into the world. This veil of flesh, which, like I said, is the world's opinions and ideas, has put a thick layer of flesh around the intrinsic abilities of God locked up within us. I've done a lot of good studies on this. I call it the heart and the subconscious mind, trying to reveal that what I'm talking about is not the latent power of the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind has powers. We've seen it demonstrated by the occult world and mystics and stuff like that. But what I'm talking about reaches beyond that. It reaches to the foundations of this world in the very mind of God, what God had intended and purposed, and how God saw the problem, as I've said, and made a solution, which was Christ slain before the foundation of the world. We were always, without excuse, we all had available power. It's just that many a generation were ignorant of this fact, and takes the New Testament under the writings of Paul to reveal the mystery of Christ in us. This power is available. It's not for lack of power. We're afraid of power. As I've said, we're afraid of power because we've had people say, oh, power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yeah, to not understand its source and to act independent from God using these intrinsic abilities or latent subconscious powers that's in each one of us, to use them independent from God is very destructive. God intends that the sons of God be manifested with their abilities, but under His leadership, not walking in the flesh, as it says, or the world's opinions and ideas, the aims and purposes, but walking in the power of the Spirit, led of the Spirit, and learning how to, as Paul mentions, to speak a word in season. Now, a lot of it I'm saying on these tapes, I don't share with many individuals, young in age, that have just entered the spring of this experience. You got to see it like seasons, we enter this life, we're in the spring of youth, in the spring of life, and then we enter into adolescence, where we get into the summer of life and the experience of this life, which God intended we have an experience, good and bad. And later on, at mid-year, 60, 70, 80, we begin to get these feelings of something other than our present world's view of the meaning, purpose of life. And we enter into the fall, and we leave like the leaves falling from the trees. We lose that which we thought was so permanent and meaningful, and we begin to gain. And then we go into a phase of life which is more like the winter of life, like in the song The Rose. The seed is buried in the snow, and in the spring the rose is manifested. The rose of Sharon, Christ in us. We go through these experiences in our lives. So if you want to just look at our phases of our experience, it was the spring of life, there was the summer of life, then there's the fall of life, then the winter, where what Steve was there lying dormant, and then when the end of this life comes, spring to new life, and the manifested rose of Sharon in us, Christ in us, and the meaning and purpose of life makes sense. We can get that here and now. Like I said, there's not an age fixed on this. If a person's experience had intended to be only 30 years in this life, these tapes are for you at 20, at 25. But for some people, they can't hear this truth until, say, maybe 50, 60 years of age. You get essence of it, you get highlights of it. God's forever giving checks and balances in the experience so we won't get trapped in it. As Paul said, don't look upon the scene. The word look, as I've mentioned over and over again, is not to have a steadfast, longing gaze or grasping rooted in this life and this temporary experience. God never intended it to get permanent. He wanted to be temporary to accomplish something, which He'll do again and again and again. This is only one phase of God's expressing of Himself, using His creation, us in that creation, to express who He is, who we are, in light of an eternal experience, not these temporary expressions which God wanted to. Now, this is going to be forever. As far as God expressing Himself, how many times is it going to take? Like I said, I'm not talking about karma. That's a misconception of what I'm talking about. They've got it all wrong. Sad. They're close to the truth, but they're far from the truth. Life has more meaning to it than we can begin to imagine. And to have a fear, and feel inadequate, feel helpless, as Adam said, feel naked, Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. And we're to gain that power to the glory of God. Now, with this power in this life, in this perspective that I'm sharing here, right? Like the question was asked there, we ask ourselves, who am I to be? Brilliant? Gregarious? Talented? Famous? Yes. You're to be all you can be, like they say in the army, be all you can be. We're to be, if you understand God's purpose of life, success apart from God is not success. For those who gain success, Apart from God's method and understanding of the meaning and purpose of life, those who gain success, like Christ said this way, what's a man profit if he gain the whole world and lose his soul, or doesn't know the meaning and purpose of it all? Whereas, as it says in the book of Proverbs, if the foundations be removed, how should a righteous stand? How will you, if you don't hear from God concerning his life, and you succeed in his life apart from God, now you can do that. And that's what puzzles some people. I've had people were debating with atheists, and the atheists saying, well, my life's great, and I have a wife and kids, and I have a house and a beautiful car, and I have a beautiful job, and make a lot of good money. I don't need God in my life. Well, you can succeed in this world without God. But the end is the profitability of this experience. Ask them the question, what's the meaning, intent, and purpose of life? They can't answer that. Or they can say, no, to live, experience, then you die. And they figure you get absorbed back in the essence of the earth, and you evolve again. All the stupid ideas they come up with, but there's no real meaning, purpose of life. I believe it was Francis Schaeffer said, he calls this the point of tension. When the big questions come, who am I? What is the meaning, purpose of life? Where am I going? What was his intent? Am I just an accident of evolution? Just by some fluke, the impersonal plus time plus chance produce this thing called humanity? What makes us more superior to the world around us of animals? Are we linked with the animals? Are we a higher creation? They can't answer these questions. They come up with some of the squirrelish ideas. That's what it says. God will confound the wisdom of the world. But make the wisdom seem like stupidity. You stop and think of it in light of what God has expressed, what he intended. Man's ideas cut off from God. Our minds can really wander off some crazy ideas of our existence and meaning, purpose of life.